in the dim heart of 15th century Europe, when the air itself seemed heavy with prayers and unspoken fears, there lived a man whose name was carried in whispers Hieronymus Ver. Ver was an alchemist. But his craft was not the pursuit of gold or elixirs. His ambition reached far beyond. To part the human soul from its living vessel. It is said he was born in Lorraine, on a night when storms tore the sky apart and the church steeples shuddered beneath unrelenting thunder. His mother's breath faded moments after his birth. His father, a bell founder, fell under suspicion for crafting church bells in a manner that defied sacred tradition. From childhood, Ver carried the weight of these shadows. Yet his eyes too, pale flames betrayed a mind unwilling to bow to the limits set upon mortal existence. At 17, he vanished from his village, leaving behind a single slip of parchment bearing an enigmatic phrase. Fuga, enemy the soul, can leave the body, if one knows how to open the door. 2 decades passed before he returned, not as the boy they remembered, but as a figure draped in black, hair the color of frost, voice as measured as a pendulum's swing. He took residence beneath the Merchant Hall of Mines in a stone chamber older than memory itself. There, in the echoing half-light, he built his instrumenta curious ark of copper and glass, arranged around a wooden chair carved in the style of forgotten kings. Upon the walls, patterns of strange symbols intertwined with diagrams that seemed to blur the boundary between science and faith. Ver named his creation the Arca Animarem, the Ark of Souls. To him, every human form was but a lantern for a greater light, and if the lantern could be carefully opened, the light within might be revealed. But such revelations demanded witnesses or participants. No one knew from where they came, only that, now and then, a face from the crowded alleys would be seen no more. On a night when the mist drifted low through the streets like a tide of pale smoke, Ver began the trial that would define him. The chamber's air trembled with a low hum as the ark awakened. The chair's occupants sat in stillness, a faint glow from the apparatus casting their features into a dreamlike haze. Symbols upon the brass circlet glimmered faintly, as though recognizing the moment. Var's gaze did not waver. Then, without a sound, something shifted, an unseen veil drawn aside. A pale outline took shape just beyond the chair, shimmering like the reflection of the moon in dark water. It lingered, turning toward Ver, with a gaze that pierced through flesh and thought alike. And then it was gone. The glow of the ark faded to embers. In the stillness that followed, Vara's lips curved into a thin, almost sorrowful smile. For he knew the door had opened, and that whatever lay beyond had looked back at him. The days that followed moved strangely, as though time itself had taken to pacing the cellar. Ver slept little, drifting instead between pages of frantic notes and long moments of unmoving silence. The assistants to gaunt men whose loyalty seemed born more from necessity than devotion left meals at his table. Untouched! They whispered that something unseen now shared the room with them. Something that had arrived the night the ark first came alive. The participant from that evening was gone from sight, but not from thought. Ver would linger by the empty chair, his gaze fixed on the space above it, as if expecting to see the faint shimmer again. It was aware of me, he murmured once, to no one in particular. It did not simply appear, it chose to appear. The notion both exhilarated and unsettled him. Beyond the cellar walls, the city began to speak of him. At first, it was only the faintest thread of gossip in the taverns, but soon the church took notice. Brother Mathis, a Dominican known for his unshakable convictions, arrived in Mainz with words heavy as iron. From the steps of the cathedral, he spoke of a craftsman who meddles with the breath of heaven. His sermons cast Ver as a shadow walker, a trespasser upon the divine. Yet the magistrates hesitated. Ver's patrons were men whose influence preferred to remain invisible. One of these was Baron Ulrich von Rissen, a figure wrapped in both wealth and weariness. Pain clung to him like an old cloak, and he believed Ver might untangle it. If the soul is untouched by the body's ruin, he said over a cup of spiced wine, then draw mine forth. Free it from the weight it carries. Ver, already leaning into the pull of his own curiosity, agreed. The appointed night came beneath a sky the color of lead. The ark stood ready, its copper limbs polished until they reflected the dim lamplight in fractured halos. The Baron took his place, the brass circlet resting gently against his brow, symbols glimmering like captive starlight. A hush settled. The apparatus began to hum, a resonance low enough to be felt in the bones. Slowly, the air seemed to thicken, as though the room itself were holding its breath. Then it appeared again more defined than before, a figure of pale luminance, its edges swaying as if moved by an invisible tide. Ver's heart quickened. The figure leaned toward him, and though it made no sound, an impression formed in his mind, words without voice, a thought not his own. The Baron shifted in the chair, his eyes opening, yet they held no reflection of the man who had entered the room. They were deep, still, and endless. "You have opened the passage?" the thought voice seemed to say. "It will not close for you." The glow of the arc dimmed, but the weight in the room did not lift. Vera stepped back, his gaze drawn to the empty spaces around him. For though they appeared void, he sensed they were no longer unoccupied.
Winter tightened its grip on Mainz, muffling the streets above in layers of frost and muted bells. In the cellar, time dissolved entirely. Ver drifted between lamplight and shadow, its quill scratching on parchment until the pages seemed to multiply like leaves in a forest. Yet no matter where he turned, whether toward the gleam of brass or the stillness of glass, he saw it, a faint, patient outline, waiting. The Baron had left, or so Ver told those who asked. But the memory of those endless eyes remained, following him into every corner of the room. At times he imagined hearing a voice near his ear, a whisper without breath, repeating the same message as before. "You have opened the passage. It will not close for you." Brother Mathis returned to Mainz with greater fervor, his warnings sharpened by rumor and fear. Claimed to have seen shapes lingering near the alchemist's dwelling, forms that recoiled from sunlight but gathered in the gloom. The authorities debated action, but Ver's name was still shielded by those who preferred the unknown to be left undisturbed. Yet disturbance came from within. Ver began to sense that the boundary he had crossed was not a line, but a slope hand. He was sliding deeper with each thought. He resolved to conduct a trial on himself. Perhaps, if he could stand apart from his own form, he might truly see the architecture of what he had unlocked. He prepared the ark with meticulous care, polishing the copper until it shone like fire in the low light. The brass circlet resting upon the table seemed almost to hum in anticipation. When at last he seated himself, the chill of the wood seeped through his bones. The soft resonance of the ark began, vibrating in the air, a note pitched somewhere between sound and silence. Then, a release, as though a cord had been cut. He was standing, yet also sitting. He could see himself bound in the chair, head bowed, breath steady. But the room around him had changed. The air shimmered, heavy, filled with a dim radiance that revealed shapes moving at the edges tall, pale figures without features, turning their unseen faces toward him. They did not speak, yet their presence pressed upon him, filling his thoughts with impressions he could not fully understand. One extended a hand, not flesh, not light, but something between, and touched the center of his chest. The sensation was neither pain nor warmth, but an unshakable mark, as if the touch had written itself into his very being. A sudden pull seized him, and the figures grew indistinct, their forms fading into a deepening haze. With effort that felt like pushing through stone, Bear found himself seated once more in the chair, the hum of the ark fading into silence. Yet the air still held the same strange weight, and when he glanced at the polished curve of a nearby vessel, the eyes in its reflection were not quite his own. The days or perhaps nights melted into one another until Ver could no longer tell them apart. The cellar seemed to breathe with him, its shadows stretching and curling as if alive. He no longer sought mirrors, yet reflections found him in the curve of every flask, in the surface of every still pool of water. The eyes that looked back were his only in shape. In their depth, something else resided. Above, the city murmured with unrest. Whispers told of shapes, glimpsed at the edge of lamplight, of voices that faded when one turned to listen. Brother Mathis spoke with greater urgency than ever, declaring that a seam has been torn in the order of things. Some in the crowd nodded in fearful agreement. Others avoided his gaze altogether. Ver tried to turn from the work, covering the ark beneath a sheet. Yet at night, the faint pulse would return a slow, steady rhythm, not unlike a heartbeat. With it came the sensation of being summoned, drawn toward the covered frame, as though the air itself leaned in that direction. And always the thought, unspoken yet undeniable, one more time. On a night when fog swallowed the streets, the cellar door opened without his bidding. A figure stepped inside Baron Ulrich von Rissen, clad in black, his movement measured and silent. Without a word, he took the chair at the heart of the ark. Ver's hands moved almost of their own accord, uncovering the apparatus, aligning the copper arcs, placing the circlet upon the Baron's brow. The resonance began at once, deeper than before, and with it came the gathering. Pale forms emerged from the edges of the room, their outlines shimmering like frost caught in moonlight. They stood in stillness, their faceless attention fixed on the center. The Baron's form stirred. When he lifted his gaze to Ver, the weight of it seemed to press through flesh into thought. The voice that reached him was not a sound, but a presence. You are the door, and you are open. Something in the air shifted, and the space around him no longer felt like the cellar. It was wider, darker, stretching into unseen distances. The figures moved closer, not walking, but arriving, until they were all around. Their nearness was not hostile, yet it was absolute. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the ark fell silent. The room was empty. No Baron, no forms in the shadows. Only Ver, standing beside the covered apparatus, his hand resting upon the brass circlet that still held a faint, steady warmth. In the weeks that followed, the cellar was found abandoned. Those who descended claimed the air was heavier there, as though it carried an echo. And on the workbench, in a shallow copper basin, water lay perfectly still. Some who dared to look swore they saw a reflection, clear, steady, unblinking. A face that might have been Ver's, or perhaps not.